Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Leave a message on our socials. Our handles are all just Nightwatch Files without the space, or head over to nightwatchfiles.com to find them all in one place. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Nightwatch Files. Content warning. This episode includes references to child abuse, medical abuse, and graphic violence. Some listeners may find the material distressing, especially for survivors of abuse. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In the early hours of June 14, 2015, a series of disturbing messages appeared on a shared Facebook account belonging to Claudine D.D. Blanchard and her daughter Gypsy. The first post was brief and jarring. It read, "That bitch is dead." An hour later, another message followed, longer, more graphic, and deeply unsettling. Concerned by the posts and unable to reach DD by phone, neighbors contacted the police. Officers arrived at the Blanchards' small pink house in Springfield, Missouri, and forced their way inside. DD was found in her bedroom, lying face down on the mattress. Her body was surrounded by blood. She had been stabbed multiple times. There was no sign of Gypsy. To those who knew the Blanchards, the situation was baffling. Gypsy was believed to be gravely ill with the mental capacity of a child. She used a wheelchair, feeding tube, and oxygen. According to her mother, she had suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and a long list of other conditions since early childhood. If Gypsy wasn't in the house, neighbors feared the worst. An urgent nationwide search was launched. But when authorities located Gypsy just a day later, alive and well, and walking without assistance, the case took a turn no one had anticipated. What followed was the unraveling of a disturbing and complex story, one that raised unsettling questions about abuse, identity, and accountability, and about what happens when a life has been so thoroughly manipulated that the only path forward seems to be escape at any cost. Claudine Petrie was born on or around July 3, 1967, in the town of Golden Meadow, Louisiana. A small Cajun community near the Gulf Coast, it was the kind of place where families stayed for generations. The Petries were among them, French Cajun through and through. Claudine, who would later become known as DD, was the youngest of 6 children. In the Petrie family, names carried weight. 3 of the siblings were named in direct reference to their father, Claude. There was Claude Jr., Claudia, and Claudine. It was unusual and suggested something about how the father saw himself, and possibly how he wanted to be seen. At home, things weren't as simple as they appeared. DD's mother, Emma, known to the family as Momsy Emma, often kept her daughter out of school, claiming she was sick when she wasn't. The pattern was consistent. Friends and neighbors may have thought DD was fragile, but the truth was more complicated. There was no documented illness, just isolation. There was also a silence around something darker. From a young age, DD was molested by her father. The abuse occurred during shared baths, sometimes while her mother moved in and out of the bathroom. It wasn't acknowledged. It wasn't spoken about. The trauma remained buried, part of a private and unresolved family history. As a child, DD began drinking vinegar in the belief that it would make her skin paler, whiter, more beautiful. By age 12, she had gained weight and reportedly tried to lose it by wrapping her midsection in plastic wrap, trying to sweat it off. Her mother's comments didn't help. Emma regularly called her fat, berating her over her appearance. The constant pressure led to disordered eating, first anorexia, then bulimia. By the time DD reached her final year of high school, she had lost nearly 200 pounds, subsisting for a full year on rice cakes alone. The timing of the weight loss coincided with puberty. Whether intentional or not, it seemed like an effort to erase something, an attempt to regain control over a body that had been violated. In 1986, during her senior year at South Lafourche High, Dee was crowned ROTC Queen. It became a defining moment in her personal narrative. For years after, she would claim the title led her into a series of statewide pageants, recounting them as milestones in a glamorous past. But records show the pageants were limited, an obligation tied only to the ROTC title. Still, it was one of the few times she had been recognized and praised. She clung to it. Around this time, Dee began to tell stories. She claimed rock stars had fallen in love with her. She said she'd inspired songs. At one point, she insisted she had a romantic relationship with Jack Russell, the lead singer of the band Great White. She framed a photo taken with him and called it proof. But it was a simple fan photo, nothing more. She sent herself flowers and claimed they came from musicians. The lies weren't always grand, but they built on each other, shaping a version of herself that was more interesting, more admired, more loved. There was also a history of theft in the family. Dee's grandmother had been arrested for shoplifting and banned from certain stores. The behavior appeared to run in the bloodline. Despite a stable, middle-class upbringing, Dee also stole. According to those who knew her later, it wasn't about need, it was about the thrill. After graduating high school, she completed 2 years of college, but never went on to nursing school as she'd once planned. By the late 1980s, she was in her early 20s and working in a hospital. Not as a nurse, just a general employee. She spoke often about her dreams of being somebody, but by the time she was 23, she was drifting. The past hadn't been dealt with. The trauma had never been spoken aloud. What remained was the aftermath, shaped by secrecy, performance, and control. It would define the years to come. In 1990, Dee met a 17-year-old named Rod Blanchard at a local bowling alley in Louisiana. Rod had recently signed himself out of high school and taken up work as a trawler, following in his father's footsteps. He was young but independent, already working full-time. Dee introduced herself and claimed she was 21. In reality, she was 2 years older than that, but Rod had no reason to doubt her. She had her own car, a Ford Fiesta, and could legally buy alcohol. To a teenage boy, it made her seem worldly and mature. Rod would later describe himself as an easygoing kid. He was flattered by Dee's attention and misread her interest as something straightforward. He thought he'd gotten lucky with an older woman. They started dating. She drove him to bars in Biloxi, took him to see hair bands in New Orleans, and hung around clubs where the music scene blurred with her past claims of rock star infatuation. Dee kept up the illusion of her groupie lifestyle, insisting on the story she'd once had a relationship with Jack Russell. Rod didn't ask many questions. He believed what she told him. Early on, she claimed she was a virgin. It was inconsistent with the rest of her stories, but Rod accepted it. From the outside, there were no signs of manipulation. Only later would those pieces fall into place. Rod's mother, Sharon, worked at the public library. One day, she found a book returned with Dee's name on the checkout card. The title was How to Get Pregnant Fast. Sharon warned her son, suspecting Dee's intentions weren't entirely honest. When Rod confronted Dee, she didn't deny it. Instead, she became angry, enraged that Sharon had seen the record at all. Dee attempted to have her fired, claiming it was a violation of confidentiality. The attempt failed, but the episode stayed with Rod. It was the first time he saw what others would later describe as Dee's taste for retaliation. A minor slight could provoke a disproportionate response. Not long after, Dee became pregnant. The child's conception wasn't accidental. Whether Rod believed that at the time is unclear, but her intentions, in retrospect, appear deliberate. The baby was born on July 27, 1991. Her name was Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Rod wasn't present. He was at the Tarpon Rodeo, a 4-day fishing tournament on Grand Isle. According to his own account, he was intoxicated and high, unaware that the birth was underway. From the beginning, Dee claimed complete possession over her child. She would often say it was us against the world. She told Rod that the baby had sleep apnea. That was the first in a long string of medical claims. Rod took it seriously. He moved back in, hoping to make things work. They rented a house together and tried to build a life, but the relationship was strained. Rod was gone for weeks at a time, working offshore. When he returned, Nothing had changed. The marriage didn't last. In 1992, they divorced. Dee retained custody, and Rod saw the child occasionally, but the visits were limited. Over time, Dee's claims about the baby's health grew more frequent and more serious. She said the infant required a CPAP machine, but years later, no medical records could confirm a diagnosis. There were no prescriptions, no doctor visits, and no paperwork that would explain where the machine had come from. It may have been bought secondhand or stolen. The early pattern was clear. Medical problems gave Dee an explanation for her circumstances. They allowed her to demand attention, to control information, and to justify her stalled career. Doctors often took her at her word, especially when symptoms couldn't be measured. Her experience working in a hospital may have helped. She knew how to sound credible. Her tone was confident, and she rarely allowed herself to be contradicted. The lies had begun, and they would only escalate from there. In the early years of Gypsy's life, she lived in what was known as the Blue House. This weathered structure sat in Golden Meadow, Louisiana, home to her maternal grandparents, Claude and Emma Petrie. It was here during approximately 5 years of her childhood that the foundation of trauma would be laid. The circumstances that brought Gypsy to this house were themselves telling of the instability that would define her early years. Her mother had recently married Rod Blanchard, only to separate from him shortly after. With nowhere else to turn, Dee returned to her childhood home, bringing young Gypsy with her. Within the walls of the Blue House, a disturbing pattern emerged. What should have been a place of safety and protection became something far more sinister. The abuse centered around what appeared to be an established ritual, bath time in the old clawfoot tub that sat in the family bathroom. The routine was methodical. Gypsy, around 5 years old, would be positioned on the toilet seat as an observer to what unfolded next. Her mother, Dee, and her grandfather, Claude, would undress and enter the tub together. Dee would wash Claude's back, and when it came time for him to turn around, she would call out those chilling words, "It's your turn." At this point, Dee would exit the tub, undress her young daughter, and place her in the water with Claude. What happened next was nothing short of child sexual abuse, disguised under the pretense of bathing. Claude would touch Gypsy inappropriately, referring to his actions as washing her pecan, a euphemism that would haunt Gypsy's memories for years to come. Perhaps most disturbing was Dee's role in these encounters. Rather than protecting her daughter, she would facilitate the abuse, sometimes leaving the bathroom entirely, checking on them only intermittently. Her complicity, whether through willful ignorance or active participation, represents a profound betrayal of the most fundamental duty of a parent, to protect their child. For Gypsy, trapped in the innocence of childhood, these experiences were processed through the limited understanding of a 5-year-old mind. She had no framework to recognize the inappropriateness of what was happening to her. In her young perception, this was simply how families behaved. She believed that daddies take bath time with their daughters, viewing Claude's lingering touches as expressions of familial love rather than the predatory behavior they actually were. This normalization of abuse would have profound implications for Gypsy's development and her ability to recognize appropriate boundaries in relationships. The very people who should have been her protectors had instead become her abusers, creating a distorted foundation of what love and care looked like. The abuse in the Blue House represents a pattern of intergenerational trauma and dysfunction that would continue to shape Gypsy's life in devastating ways. The failure of the adults in her life to protect her during these formative years would contribute to the complex psychological landscape that permeated most of Gypsy's life. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In 1999, Gypsy had been riding on the back of her grandfather Claude's Harley-Davidson when a car abruptly cut them off. He swerved to avoid a collision, and they sideswiped off the road. She came away from the crash with scrapes and bruises. Road rash, nothing more. Her mother rushed her to the hospital where doctors cleared her. No broken bones, no internal injuries. But when they returned home, Dee Dee treated the incident like a trauma far more serious. She began nursing her daughter as if she'd suffered a life-altering injury. First came a walker, then physical therapy, and finally, a wheelchair. From that point on, Dee Dee insisted her daughter remain seated at all times, not just in public, but in the privacy of their home as well. There was no medical reason for the wheelchair. Dee Dee simply brought it home one day and expected it to be used. Her daughter was never allowed to move independently again. As the girl grew older, Dee Dee maintained strict control. If she so much as twitched her legs, Dee Dee would notice. "Gypsy, I see you moving your legs," she would say, sometimes rapping her knee to make the point. "Stop moving them." The chair was a daily reinforcement of control, a habit that had to be maintained. In the early years, Dee Dee told people that the wheelchair was necessary because of the motorcycle crash. But over time, her stories changed. When they moved to a new town or met new doctors, the explanation shifted. At one point, Dee Dee claimed seizures had caused brain damage. By 2012, a cardiologist's record stated that the girl was a quadriplegic from birth. That meant she was supposedly paralyzed from the neck down, and yet nobody questioned it. Some family members did challenge Dee Dee. They didn't believe the child needed a wheelchair, but that only caused Dee Dee to pack up and leave, removing her daughter from anyone who might intervene. It was a familiar pattern. When people started asking questions, Dee Dee disappeared. A Medicaid-funded power wheelchair was eventually approved, a Jazzy HD. But Dee Dee stopped using it. Instead, she chose a standard, foldable wheelchair, one that had to be pushed, one that gave her full control. She could dictate when and where her daughter moved. The chair became another tool of dependency. Later, her daughter would call it a mirage, an unnecessary prop that fooled everyone around them. The wheelchair was only part of the control. Soon after the crash, when Gypsy was around 9 years old, Dee Dee arranged for a feeding tube to be surgically inserted into her abdomen. There was no legitimate medical reason, but Dee Dee offered plenty of false ones. A fear of eating, swallowing problems, food allergies, cancer. She told different people different things. The goal was control. The tube wasn't used for real meals. It was strictly for water, nutritional supplements like Pediasure, and medication. For taste, Gypsy was allowed to use a baby bottle, a preference Dee Dee continued to justify into her daughter's 20s by claiming she was very mentally slow. It was one of the only ways she was permitted to eat. By the time she was 24, she weighed just 92 pounds. Gypsy described the feeding tube as an umbilical cord between them. Dee Dee could turn the supply on and off at will, a human spigot. There was no autonomy, not even over hunger. She hated the feeding tube. She remembered being terrified when doctors told her they would have to cut into her abdomen to insert it. But she had no choice. Like the wheelchair, it became another symbol of Dee Dee's total control over her body and life. Dee Dee Blanchard's deception went far beyond a single lie. Over many years, she wove an intricate web of falsehoods, convincing charities, government agencies, and medical professionals that her daughter was chronically and severely ill. This was a carefully crafted performance, designed to secure aid, sympathy, and material benefits. Dee Dee was a natural storyteller. She knew how to pick her words to ensnare the listener, creating elaborate, evolving narratives about Gypsy's health. Each time they moved to a new town, the stories grew more complex. She claimed Gypsy had a low IQ, citing imaginary seizures or a chromosomal abnormality she had found and exploited as proof. Her fabrications were layered, detailed, and convincing. When Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005, Dee Dee seized the opportunity to deepen her deception. She told agencies that all their medical records had been lost in the storm, painting themselves as refugees and victims with dead relatives and lost possessions. This narrative helped secure housing through Habitat for Humanity in Missouri, where they moved and were welcomed with open arms. Dee studied the system closely, learning how to live off the system by applying for multiple benefits. She acquired several government-issued phones, each tied to different programs. She manipulated charity schemes designed to reimburse travel costs for medical visits. Even when they flew free via Angel Flight, she still collected gas money, pocketing funds without actually driving anywhere. Her control extended to manipulating information itself. Dee provided inconsistent details about Gypsy's birth date and personal data, sometimes changing her age to appear younger after Gypsy began menstruating. This was done to prevent doctors' catastrophic reactions. On official documents, Gypsy's last name was spelled in varying ways, sometimes with a hyphen, other times with an extra E at the end, Blanchard, possibly to avoid detection or create distance from her father. Dee even faked medical symptoms. She pricked her own finger to add blood to a urine sample, simulating kidney problems. She reported severe allergic reactions to kidney dye, though doctors never witnessed any. These claims became accepted facts, recorded with a mere pen stroke. Food allergies were another fabricated element, including an allergy to sugar, despite allowing Gypsy to eat fruit freely. In public and private, Dee controlled every word Gypsy spoke. She scripted phone calls, spoke over her, and hovered to keep the narrative intact. Gypsy was stripped of her voice, unable to express herself without her mother's interference. Dee isolated her from family and school officials, claiming she was homeschooled, another lie. The benefits flowed in: food stamps, disability checks, medical insurance covering custom power wheelchairs. Dee basked in the attention, the sympathy, and the media spotlight. The fabricated illnesses gave her a kind of martyrdom, a public persona she craved. Gypsy later described her mother's Munchausen by proxy as a backstage pass to an internal cinematic show only Dee controlled. As Gypsy grew older, cracks began to show. She realized the wheelchair was a prop, the feeding tube a symbol of her mother's absolute control. Slowly, awareness grew, setting the stage for a desperate fight for freedom. Dee Blanchard's deception extended beyond fabricated illnesses to include criminal behavior, notably teaching Gypsy Rose to shoplift from a very young age. This was part of a pattern of manipulation and control that made the deeper layers of their troubled relationship. Gypsy later learned that kleptomania ran in Dee's family. Her grandmother, Emma, had a history of stealing and was banned from food and clothing stores multiple times. Despite growing up in a comfortable middle-class home, Emma's thefts were thought to be driven by the thrill rather than necessity, a tendency that seemed to have passed down to Dee. Gypsy believed that sometimes they stole because they simply couldn't afford certain items. But just as often, Dee seemed to enjoy the satisfaction of getting away with it. She taught Gypsy the art of shoplifting, turning Gypsy's wheelchair into a tool for concealment. Dee would knock items into Gypsy's lap or hide goods beneath the tulle of her princess dresses. For items that couldn't be easily hidden, Dee showed Gypsy how to swap barcodes, removing a cheaper price tag and placing it on a more expensive item before using the self-checkout lane. They targeted places like Sam's Club, where no metal detectors allowed Gypsy to hide a dozen or more CDs on her person. Hobby Lobby was another frequent target, with arts and crafts supplies making up much of the stolen merchandise, materials Gypsy would later use in her own drawings and paintings. One day at Hobby Lobby, the alarm was triggered. A manager and employee confronted them outside the store, the manager demanding a search of Gypsy, specifically where the stolen crafts were hidden under her dress. Dee feigned outrage with a staged victim's voice, but the search uncovered the sticky, glittery contraband. They were taken to the back office, and police were called. Charges were pressed. The result: Dee and Gypsy were banned from all Hobby Lobby stores nationwide. Dee was furious about the incident, frustrated at having to hire an attorney. Yet the band did not stop her from stealing elsewhere. Gypsy later realized many stolen items were never even used. They were trophies of deception. Dee had a criminal past in Louisiana with several charges, but these never followed her after they moved states, allowing her to evade consequences. Dee's control was also evident in how she managed Gypsy's emerging womanhood. When Gypsy got her first period at 13, Dee responded not with comfort, but with coldness. Gypsy thought the blood was barbecue sauce and cried out, frightened. Dee told her, "You're bleeding, baby. You're going to bleed like that for a good part of your life," but offered no explanation about menstruation or what it meant. Instead of pads or tampons, Dee gave Gypsy a clean pull-up diaper. This lack of nurture left Gypsy feeling ashamed and confused. Dee lied to doctors for years afterward, insisting Gypsy had never started menstruating. This caused concern and led to repeated tests, including invasive catheter insertions and examinations of her pituitary gland. After Gypsy's period began, Dee started to manipulate her age on official documents, knocking back years to avoid medical scrutiny. Dee's suppression of Gypsy's womanhood extended beyond menstruation. She discouraged toys that revealed female anatomy, preferring clean baby dolls. She insisted breasts were sinful and had to be covered, and that pubic hair was dirty and must be shaved. Gypsy suspected this was a form of brainwashing designed to keep her childlike, matching the fabricated medical narrative Dee had created. Even Gypsy's appearance was controlled. Dee kept her hair short, fearing that longer hair made her look like her father, whom Dee despised. Gypsy Rose Blanchard's struggle with addiction was closely tied to the controlling and manipulative behavior of her mother. Gypsy began abusing Dee's prescription painkillers, seeking relief from the isolation and oppression she endured daily. Though Gypsy occasionally received pain medication for dental work or minor surgeries, Dee had frequent prescriptions for Vicodin and oxycodone, prescribed for chronic kidney stones and persistent leg pain. As Gypsy grew into her teenage years and started pushing back against Dee's restrictions, their arguments intensified. After one particularly harsh yelling match, Gypsy turned to the painkillers, not for physical pain, but to find calm. What started as occasional use quickly became dependency. The pills were a thrilling turbulence, a friend to depend on, numbing her emotional pain and loneliness. Dee was aware of Gypsy's use, but said nothing, possibly preferring it when her direct control failed, as the drugs effectively shut her up. The addiction escalated. One pill wasn't enough. Gypsy began doubling doses, eventually crushing pills to inject them through her feeding tube for an instant high. This state lowered her inhibitions, giving her the courage to express herself in chat rooms, posting selfies in wigs showing cleavage, something unthinkable under Dee's strict supervision. Dee's anger surfaced only when her own supply ran low. On one occasion, when a pharmacy refused an early refill, Dee dragged Gypsy to the police station and concocted a story. They claimed they'd been robbed in a Walmart parking lot and that thugs had stolen Dee's pain medication bottle. This police report allowed Dee to secure an early refill, maintaining the flow of drugs for both of them. Dee's manipulation extended into self-harm and emotional blackmail. Gypsy recalls noticing raised red marks carved into Dee's arm, spelling the word pain. Dee said the marks helped relieve the pain and used the act to reinforce their codependent relationship. "I help you, you help me," she told Gypsy, binding her to a cycle of caretaking and control. Suicide threats were a frequent tactic. Dee would say things like, "You know, Gypsy, I might look big like a rhino, but I don't have the skin of one," or simply, "I just want to die." Initially, Gypsy feared losing the fragile family unit they had. Over time, she recognized these threats as calculated attempts to guilt her, wielded whenever Gypsy challenged Dee or asserted herself. This emotional blackmail was designed to isolate Gypsy and prevent her from building relationships or seeking independence. In 2009, the Department of Family Services visited after concerns raised by a hospital. A doctor had reported that symptoms supporting Dee's claims about Gypsy were lacking. There were also inconsistencies around Gypsy's birth date and medical history. DFS aimed to see if Gypsy was a missing juvenile and to confirm DD's relationship to her. At the time, Gypsy was not drugged and still trusted her mother. She was even excited to have visitors. 2 women from DFS and a deputy sheriff arrived. DD spoke with them first, then Gypsy was interviewed inside. They examined her arms and legs for bruises. Gypsy honestly said there were none. Yet. Her bedroom was a pink and magical princess-themed space. DD explained their multiple names and locations as a way to evade Gypsy's father. When confronted about conflicting birth dates, DD gave contradictory answers, claiming she didn't know why they were wrong. The investigators seemed to miss these glaring inconsistencies. They left without further action and never returned. Following the visit, DD's paranoia grew. She disconnected their doorbell and covered every window with black trash bags. When Gypsy confronted DD about her Medicaid card that revealed her real birth year as 1991, she called it a typo. She was living a life believing she was 4 years younger. This discovery didn't immediately shatter Gypsy's trust, but planted a seed of doubt. It was a warning siren, prompting her to observe more closely, aware that her mother's stories didn't add up. This knowledge would later give her a sense of legal adulthood she hoped to use for freedom. In 2012, at age 20, a doctor ordered a chromosome test after struggling to explain Gypsy's supposed illnesses. The test revealed a microdeletion on chromosome 1, called 1q21.1, a small piece of chromosome 1 missing in each cell. Gypsy researched this condition and learned it could be associated with developmental delays, intellectual disability, physical abnormalities, and psychiatric issues. DD's list of fabricated illnesses neatly fit under these categories. However, Gypsy emphatically states she never exhibited any of those symptoms. Her medical records consistently showed no abnormalities. She was not intellectually disabled, despite DD's claims she had the mind of a 7-year-old. This raised questions about DD's motives. Did she know about the microdeletion before the test and use it as a blueprint for her lies? Or was this coincidental? A rare case where a claimed disorder turned out to be real but without symptoms. Gypsy remains unsettled, wondering if DD feared what the future might hold, or even shared the same genetic anomaly herself. Before this test, DD's stories were already wildly inconsistent. She told some people Gypsy was wheelchair-bound due to a car accident, others heard muscular dystrophy. These fabrications long predated the microdeletion discovery, showing DD's pattern of deception. In March 2011, Gypsy Rose Blanchard met Dan online through Facebook after adding people she met at a pop culture convention. Dan was in his 30s and initially believed Gypsy was just 15. Over several months, they spoke secretly, exploring who Gypsy might be beyond her mother's control. They talked about simple things: hair color, favorite restaurants, music, and even kissing. Most importantly, Dan became the first person Gypsy ever told she could walk. She confided how DD spun false stories, scolded her for moving her legs, and how doctors were beginning to question her. Often high during these conversations, Gypsy dreamed of escaping with Dan. It was during this time that Gypsy discovered her true birth year, 1991, on her Medicaid card. This revelation meant she was actually 19, not 15 as DD claimed. Dan told her, "If this is true, you don't have to stay with her. You can start a new life." Gypsy later reflected this was a natural urge to separate from her mother, fueled by growing up and hormones, pushing her toward rebellion. That rebellion was met with violence. One day in April 2011, DD caught Gypsy on the phone with Dan. Gypsy dropped to the floor, covering her head as DD grabbed the phone and hung up. Calm but furious, DD ordered her into her wheelchair and into the van. There, DD called her a goddamn whore before pulling into a Kansas City alley. She punched Gypsy's legs with closed fists, hitting every healthy muscle in her thighs, causing redness and blood blisters. DD screamed questions. What did you tell him? Where did you meet him? Who is he? How much did you tell him? Each one followed by a blow. She dug her nails into Gypsy's face and said, "I hate you." Gypsy felt DD was trying to assert total control. The bruises on her legs were the true colors of her soul, black and blue. After the attack, DD called Dan and threatened him, warning, You know she's only 15. If you contact her again, I'll call the cops. Gypsy's first escape attempt came shortly after, on Good Friday, April 22nd. She packed a bag with clothes, a Lilo and Stitch movie, her baby bottle, stolen oxycodone, and left a note explaining she was really 19 and wanted independence. She walked to a neighbor's house and asked for a ride to the hospital, where Dan was recovering from a beating. But Dee Dee tracked her down with the help of friends from the convention. When Dee Dee confronted Gypsy at Dan's friend's house early the next morning, she bargained, promising, "If you come back with me, I will let you see him." Gypsy believed her and returned. Once home, Dee Dee found lingerie in Gypsy's bag, forced her to take a pregnancy test, and smashed her laptop and phone. Dee Dee then performed a gree-gree ritual, burying a mason jar in the backyard near the shed containing a photo of Gypsy and Dan, a cow's tongue to silence her, and some of Gypsy's period blood. Dee Dee chanted, "By God, Gypsy Rose will never find true love. Gypsy Rose will never find happiness." Gypsy interpreted it as a curse that Gypsy will never be free. To keep control, Dee Dee handcuffed Gypsy to a dog leash and attached it to herself or the bedpost. For 2 weeks, Gypsy was at Dee Dee's mercy for everything: bathroom breaks, food, even movement. Dee Dee often starved her, feeding only broth every other day. A knife sat by Dee Dee's bedside, a threat if Gypsy tried to escape. Gypsy felt trapped, close to her mother's skin, but thousands of miles apart, like a simulation. By 2012, the control tightened further. After the trauma of being chained and punished, Gypsy's desperation grew. Dee Dee restricted her more, no longer allowing use of the custom power wheelchair and forcing her into a foldable one she had to push. Dee Dee became more erratic, more desperate. Gypsy hid a backpack behind the couch, preparing for another escape. When Dee Dee launched a violent search, Gypsy tried to block her from finding it. Frustrated and cornered, Gypsy grabbed a .22 caliber BB gun and an old Chinese dagger from the kitchen table. She shot 10 BB pellets at Dee Dee, cutting her flesh. Dee Dee yelled, "You shot me!" and retreated to the bathroom. Gypsy followed, demanding her bag and freedom. She asked, "Why can't I be like other kids? Why do you shave my head? Why can't I be like Alia? Why is my life this way?" She unleashed years of resentment over Dan, the chaining, the curse, the loneliness, the diapers, the pills, and the surgeries. Dee Dee responded with twisted affection. "I love you. You are my heart, and I can't live without my heart, because I need you." Gypsy cried. Dee Dee tended to her wounds but never hit or tied Gypsy again. Gypsy felt a shift. They were now equals in a strange, uneasy truce. Though still confined to a wheelchair, their relationship spoke different languages. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On October 12, 2012, Gypsy Rose Blanchard met Nick Godejohn online through a Christian dating site. By then, she was 19 and driven by what she described as a cliché need for a man in her life. Gypsy Rose created a profile that allowed her to craft a real persona. She wore a brown wig, what her hair would have looked like if Dee Dee hadn't shaved it off, and donned a prom dress bought on clearance. For the first time, she felt beautiful in her own body, appreciating her breasts and hips. Her profile portrayed her as a happy, bubbly girl interested in sci-fi and fantasy, a virgin waiting for her husband, and someone who loved animals and the outdoors despite her sheltered life. Nick winked at her profile, and Gypsy felt a surge of pride. "Someone wanted me for me," she recalled. She craved love and attention that wasn't rooted in pity. Their relationship quickly took a dark turn. Nick demanded sexually explicit videos of Gypsy performing acts like sucking on a dildo. He praised her when she did well, but threatened to withdraw his love if she faltered or forgot to call him master. This pattern of conditional affection mirrored the carrot and stick game she had long known from her mother's manipulation. Nick introduced her to BDSM, though Gypsy later said he didn't really understand it and made it up as we went along. The BDSM elements left her feeling cringed and demoralized. She was uncomfortable playing his submissive. Yet Nick balanced this with an intricate fantasy world of good versus evil, filled with mystical beasts, spells, and poison potions. It was an upside-down version of her reality that appealed to her love of sci-fi stories. Within this fantasy, she was his queen, but with a duty to fulfill. Gypsy adopted 4 personas in this world. Demona, a half-werewolf, half-human, Kitty, her childlike side, Candy, her slutty self, and Ruby, the evil one. Through their laptop cameras, they played these roles, with Gypsy Rose dressing in costume and addressing Nick as master. Nick was the only adult who knew the truth. She could walk, didn't struggle to breathe at night, wasn't mentally disabled, and had scars from an unnecessary surgery. Yet she felt she was simply swapping one mask for another, telling truths that flew right into the mud. She believed if she was a good girl, Nick would protect her. Having a boyfriend meant becoming a real teenager, part of a culture club filled with peers. While her mother had defeminized her, Nick, in his warped way, promised she'd become a woman if he, quote, carved me up with a knife. To bring Nick into her real life, Gypsy devised a meet-cute plan. They would accidentally meet at the movie theater she frequented with DD. Nick would appear in the lobby, and they'd pretend to meet for the first time. Gypsy believed this would make DD feel involved rather than threatened. Nick declared, "I will take your virginity at the movie theater, and you will be mine forever. I will own you." Gypsy agreed, desperate to get that part over with and see Nick in person. They planned to meet in the bathroom during the film. On March 12, 2015, Gypsy dressed in a Cinderella costume and tiara to accompany DD to the live-action Cinderella movie. She double-dosed on oxycodone for cramps, her diaper sticky beneath the polyester dress, but eager for her Prince Charming to appear. Nick showed up, awkward and a terrible actor. DD didn't buy it. She found Nick creepy and demanded Gypsy stay close. Gypsy convinced DD to let her go to the bathroom alone. There, in the men's restroom, Nick followed into the wheelchair-accessible stall. They kissed awkwardly, but when Nick's hands slipped beneath her dress and encountered her diaper and blood, he went limp. Unable to penetrate, he pressed himself against her, claiming they were married nonetheless. Afterward, DD found Gypsy staring blankly with Nick. DD walked out, leaving Gypsy Rose nervous. Nick promised to call when he got on the bus back to Wisconsin. Back in the parking lot, DD ignored Gypsy, who climbed into the passenger seat. DD flung Gypsy's wheelchair inside the van in anger and confronted her. "What were you thinking? Are you trying to kill me? You know I'm not well, Gypsy. I swear if I die, it will be you who killed me. You already tried to shoot me once." Gypsy thought only of getting high. At home, DD took Gypsy's wheelchair handles and pushed her through the house to the backyard. Gypsy pleaded, but DD called her a liar and whore, forcing her past the spot where the cursed mason jar was buried. DD led her to the shed, once a childhood playhouse, now a prison. As dusk fell, DD said, "You can't be trusted. Get in." Gypsy obeyed, leaving her wheelchair behind and sitting on the dirt among stolen clothes. Her sobs failed to reach DD's wall of hatred and jealousy. DD slammed and padlocked the shed door behind her. Gypsy was left hungry, thirsty, freezing, and alone without her pills. She feared spiders, sent telepathic pleas to DD, and clung to thoughts of Nick. After finding warm clothes, she finally slept, dreaming of her real family and a police station where she learned DD was not your real mother and her life was a lie. Morning brought numbness and despair. DD returned around noon, triumphant, and wheeled her back inside for an ENT appointment. At the appointment, a pulmonologist suggested exploratory surgery on Gypsy's larynx to fix her high-pitched voice. For Gypsy, this was a threat to her literal voice and expression. She saw it as DD's final attempt to muzzle her. Gypsy pleaded hysterically, but DD refused to discuss it. The threat to her voice, the confinement in the shed, the failure of outsiders to recognize what was happening, even after a visit from DFS that found nothing wrong, all compounded into a sense of hopelessness. Gypsy saw no way out of her life. It pushed her to a breaking point. The choice to her was clear: it's me or her. Afterward, Gypsy double-dosed on oxycodone and messaged Nick, asking if he would still protect her, even from her mother. He said yes. Their conversations shifted toward how Nick could protect Gypsy Rose by removing Dee Dee from her life. Gypsy described the discussions as gradual, woven into an elaborate fantasy world Nick had created, rather than a sudden, concrete plan. Nick's dark fantasies began to merge with their plot. He spoke openly about violent acts, including murdering and then raping his ex-girlfriend, revealing a disturbing mindset. Together, they brainstormed methods to eliminate Dee Dee. Gypsy's first idea was for Nick to visit, have sex with her, and get her pregnant, believing Dee Dee would be forced to accept him as the father. Gypsy even shoplifted prenatal vitamins and a pregnancy test, posting about it on Facebook, a move that alerted Nick's mother, who was far from pleased. The plan failed as Dee Dee had previously threatened to force an abortion if Gypsy became pregnant. Nick suggested arson, burning down the house by knocking over a candle, but Gypsy rejected the idea, worried about too many unpredictable variables. They considered poison, discussing Roundup or arsenic. Gypsy insisted on a quick and painless death, finding poison too brutal. Nick proposed shooting Dee Dee, but Gypsy realized she couldn't obtain a gun without a state-issued ID. The plan grew darker. Nick sent photos of a large fillet knife resembling a machete. He expressed desires to strangle Dee Dee, stab her, and feed her body to pigs. He demanded triple locking handcuffs, a ball gag, and a taser to, quote, torture her a little. Gypsy pushed back, wanting the death to be painless. Nick then told her to get duct tape instead. Finally, the plan settled. Gypsy would steal a large kitchen knife from Walmart for Nick to use. After the attack, he would rape her, then leave Dee Dee's body in her bed. Nick later added a gruesome demand: load Dee Dee's corpse into a van, rape her with a condom, then forced Gypsy to suck his semen from her mother's body before dumping it at a pig farm. Gypsy refused, citing her 95-pound frame and Dee Dee's 200-pound weight. The plan reverted to leaving the body where it was. On the morning of June 9, 2015, Gypsy Rose reflected on her mother as an obstacle, something she wanted to disappear forever. She consciously slowed the evening, staying present, taking in her mother in a way she never had before. She smelled Dee Dee's baby pillow, imprinting her scent in memory, whispering an apology. Then she wiped her tears, got into her wheelchair, and found Dee Dee in the kitchen preparing dinner. Gypsy wheeled up behind her and hugged her waist. When Dee Dee turned, she saw Gypsy's eyes were wet. Gypsy said, "I love you." Dee Dee replied, "Baby, I love you too, but I'm not dead yet." Gypsy had told Nick she would leave surgical gloves outside and text him when Dee Dee was asleep, so he could come inside and she could hand him the knife. After dinner, they ran an errand at Walmart, watched Merlin, then painted each other's nails, liquid cotton candy pink. Gypsy painted her nails for Nick, as promised. At 1:30 a.m., Gypsy texted Nick, "She's asleep." Her focus wasn't on the murder, but on the aftermath, on freedom. Nick replied, "Okay, getting a cab now." Gypsy took 3 Vicodin, wheeled to the door, and let him in. She did not dare walk, fearing her mother might wake. Nick, dressed in dark sweatpants, a black graphic t-shirt and hoodie, immediately asked, "Okay, where's the knife?" Gypsy pulled the large kitchen knife from under the couch cushion. Nick ordered, "Get your ass to the bathroom." Gypsy went to the bathroom, sat on the floor, and covered her ears. Despite this, she heard everything. Nick entered Dee Dee's room silently. The bedroom door had been removed. Dee Dee must have woken from his presence, not noise. Gypsy heard her voice, muffled, asking, "Who are you?" Nick later said he told Dee Dee, "I am death. You will die now." But Gypsy did not hear this, only screaming. Gypsy lay curled, hands pressed hard over her ears, still hearing Dee Dee say, "Stop! Enough! Enough, please, enough." There was a pause, then a gargled voice saying, "Gypsy, Gypsy." She didn't respond, stayed still. She heard one sharp, "Help me." Nick had cut the back of Dee Dee's neck so deeply she was almost decapitated. When Dee Dee resisted, Nick kept stabbing, saying, "Death is calling to you, stop fighting." Gypsy hadn't asked for that brutality. After the silence, Nick did not approach her. Instead, he wiped the knife in the kitchen and removed his gloves. Gypsy was stripped naked in the bathtub, running water, shaving legs and vagina, wiping herself clean. Nick scratched on the bathroom door, the agreed signal. Naked, Gypsy opened it. Nick stood with the knife wrapped in a paper towel, walked in, set the knife on the counter and stretched out his arms for a hug. She hugged him. Nick ordered, "Say thank you." Gypsy repeated, "Thank you, sir," shivering and wondering when relief would come. Nick's finger was cut and bleeding. He told Gypsy to clean him up. She obeyed, wiping his finger with an alcohol swab, just as she had tended DD's wounds after the BB gun incident. She dabbed blood on his shoe and wiped a red handprint from his arm. They sat holding each other. Nick's steadiness calmed her. Then he told her to go to her bedroom. With head bowed, Gypsy walked naked to her room, never using her wheelchair again. She felt exposed, her bald head, gummy mouth, since Nick forbade wig and dentures. Passing DD's room, she glimpsed blankets and clothes piled high, DD buried in chaos. Nick followed, ordering her to remove stuffed animals from her pink princess bed. She complied, lying supine as he took off his pants, straddled her, and pinned her legs. He wrapped his arms around her neck, choking her. She tried to scream for her mother, but had no air. This was not what she agreed to. She begged him to stop, but he continued, holding her wrists, biting, strangling, trying to force himself inside her as he had in the movie theater bathroom. He complained, "I don't hear you saying thank you, my submissive." She managed to say it, but he showed no arousal. She feared non-compliance would lead him to rape her mother's corpse. To Gypsy, this was rape. She said no and cried for her dead mother. The assault ended without clear closure. Gypsy's memory blurred. The next thing she recalled was Nick packing clothes into a suitcase, the zipper sealing finality. While waiting for a taxi, Nick ordered her to clean blood trails from DD's room to the kitchen. She used baby wipes, not thinking about their origin. She grabbed her mother's money pouch with $4,000, along with Vicodin and oxycodone. Nick ordered her to say, "Thank you, sir," which she repeated. Gypsy removed pictures from walls, bagged them, and took them to the curb. She reasoned that without photos, no one would know she lived there, and police would assume DD was a single woman living alone. In many ways, she had been. In the early hours of June 10th, 2015, as dawn broke over Springfield, Missouri, two figures checked into a room at the Days Inn Hotel. Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nicholas Godejohn had just committed murder, leaving behind the body of D.D. Blanchard in her home. What followed was a 5-day period that would see their carefully laid plans unravel in spectacular fashion. The pair had initially intended to catch a bus to Wisconsin that same day, where they planned to start their new life together at Nick's family home. However, reality quickly intruded on their fantasy. Bus tickets to Wisconsin wouldn't be available until June 12th, 2 days away. They were trapped in Springfield, forced to extend their stay in the hotel room while DD's body lay undiscovered. During these surreal days of hiding, a routine emerged. Pizza was ordered daily. Gypsy consumed painkillers regularly, describing herself as being high as a kite and living in La La Land. The oxycodone that had once been prescribed for her fabricated medical conditions now served as an escape from the reality of what they had done. She would later admit to being high all the way through, a fog of drugs and shock that would define these crucial early hours. But as the hours passed, the euphoria began to wear thin, replaced by a growing anxiety that would ultimately seal their fate. Gypsy's drug-addled mind began to fixate on something they hadn't properly planned for. What would happen to her mother's body? The thought tormented her. DD's corpse was lying in that house, and with each passing hour, decomposition would set in. Even worse, she remembered their cats and the horrifying possibility that the hungry animals might feast on her mother's remains. Despite everything DD had put her through, Gypsy found herself consumed by her mother's final wishes. She recalled DD's specific instructions about death, quote, "Don't you dare cremate me. You stick me in the ground." This mounting panic about honoring her abuser's burial wishes would drive Gypsy to make the decision that would bring their brief freedom to an end. From her hotel room, Gypsy accessed the Facebook account she shared with her mother, an account that had been central to maintaining the elaborate fiction of their lives. What she posted next would shock everyone who knew them, and set in motion the investigation that would ensue throughout the following days. The first message was brief but devastating. "That bitch is dead." The response was immediate. People who saw the post assumed the account had been hacked. Messages poured in from concerned friends and neighbors, asking if everything was okay. Some wondered if they were simply watching a movie, unable to believe that such a stark announcement could be real. But Gypsy interpreted this reaction as indifference. People weren't concerned enough, weren't taking it seriously. In her altered state, she felt compelled to elaborate, to make them understand the gravity of what had happened. What she posted next was far more disturbing. "I fucking slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so fucking loud." The graphic nature of this second post left no room for doubt. This wasn't a hack or a movie reference. Something terrible had happened, and the police were called immediately. What Gypsy and Nick didn't realize, trapped in their hotel room cocoon of pizza and painkillers, was that the media had seized upon their story. The case of the missing disabled girl and her murdered mother had captured public attention, and the investigation was moving with startling speed. A crucial break came from an unexpected source. Aliyah, their neighbor, had been one of the few people aware of Gypsy's secret online relationship. When police interviewed her, she provided them with vital information about Nick. This single piece of intelligence allowed investigators to trace Gypsy's laptop IP address directly back to Nick's family home in Wisconsin. 5 days after the murder, on June 15, 2015, the net finally closed around them. Armored police vehicles surrounded the Gadajon family home. What appeared to be a SWAT team took positions around the property. The operation was being treated as a kidnapping case. Authorities still believed Gypsy was a victim rather than a perpetrator. Nick's family, including his 8-year-old brother, were evacuated from their home as loudspeakers crackled to life. "Nick Gadajon, come out with your hands above your head." Inside the house, Gypsy and Nick were naked when they heard the announcement. As they quietly dressed, Gypsy would later describe the surreal quality of hearing Nick's name called out like he was a known fugitive. The fantasy they had been living was about to end. In those final moments of freedom, Nick gave Gypsy their cover story. They would claim that Dee Dee had kicked her out and he had simply picked her up from the streets. It was a desperate lie, hastily constructed in the face of overwhelming evidence. They sealed this pact with a kiss, perhaps their last moment of intimacy before the full weight of the justice system came down upon them. Nick allowed Gypsy to go down the stairs first, to face whatever waited beyond that front door. What she encountered was a scene from a nightmare, a sea of bulletproof vests and helmets and guns, with laser sights trained directly on her. The young woman who had spent her entire life as a prisoner in her own home, controlled and manipulated by her mother, now found herself facing a different kind of captivity. The brief taste of freedom she had experienced, those 5 days of pizza, drugs, and the illusion of escape, was over. The investigation that followed would reveal the full extent of the deception that had defined Gypsy's life and the desperate act of violence that had finally ended it. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On June 15, 2015, after being arrested at Nick Gadajon's home in Wisconsin, Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nick were transported in separate police vehicles to a local precinct. There, they waited for detectives from Missouri. Each was placed in a different room. Stan Hancock questioned Gypsy. Angela Mahoney spoke with Nick. They both initially stuck to the same false account, that Dee Dee had kicked Gypsy out of the house and Nick had picked her up from the street. But that story quickly fell apart. Detectives used a familiar tactic. They told Nick that Gypsy had already turned on him. The bluff worked. The couple turned on each other. Nick said Gypsy was the mastermind, that he was trying to save her from years of abuse. According to him, she had bought the knife, handed him gloves, and collected duct tape for the murder. Gypsy told a different story. She described Nick as the monster. She said her mother was her best friend. She told police that Nick had a dark side, that he once said he wanted to feed her mother's body to pigs and rape Gypsy beside her corpse. She described Nick as sick. Nick countered by telling officers DD had convinced everyone Gypsy was the sick one. Despite feeling betrayed by what she saw in Nick's taped confession, Gypsy still worried about him. She later admitted that seeing him blame her had hurt deeply, but some part of her still cared. Roughly a week after being extradited to Greene County Jail in Missouri, Gypsy received her first visit. Her father, Rod, stepmother, Christy, grandmother, Sharon, and Aunt Celeste had traveled from New Orleans to see her. During the visit, Gypsy grew emotional. She asked them directly, "What happened to Mama? Did she have a funeral? Did you go?" Christy gave her the answer. "There was no money for a funeral, baby. Dee Dee was cremated." The news devastated Gypsy. She remembered Dee Dee's words, "Don't you dare cremate me. You stick me in the ground." Gypsy blamed herself. She thought, "I hated me. I had taken life from my mother, and now I had taken her wish for death." Later, she would say that moment nearly pushed her over the edge. She thought about using her smock to end her life. By late 2015, Gypsy had been in Greene County Jail for several months. Around Halloween, she was cleared to join the general population. Though authorities had at first assumed she was gravely ill, her health was improving. She had already gained 10 pounds, but withdrawal from oxycodone was severe. Gypsy described it as debilitating. Coming off painkillers cold turkey caused stomach cramps, flu-like symptoms, uncontrollable vomiting, and cold sweats. She felt abandoned. No one explained what was happening to her. Despite the suffering, Gypsy later said the experience had value. Withdrawal was brutal, but it marked the beginning of her freedom. Around this time, Gypsy also began repairing her relationship with her father and stepmother. Her trust in them had been clouded by years of Dee Dee's manipulation. Dee Dee had convinced her that Rod and Christy were dangerous, absent, or uninterested. But Gypsy's attorney, Mike Stanfield, revealed the truth. Rod had been sending her money and gifts for years. He sent letters and cards, even a laptop. He'd called often, left messages. He hadn't given up on her. When Christy explained how Dee Dee had prevented them from seeing Gypsy or planning visits, it became clear just how much had been stolen from them. Gypsy said it was painful to process, but it also brought healing. Her real family had loved her all along. In October 2015, shortly after being removed from suicide watch, Gypsy had her feeding tube taken out. A surgeon, described as disinterested and robotic, removed it quickly and without ceremony. Gypsy had spent years believing she would die without that tube. Her mother had told her that. She'd said the feeding tube was necessary for survival, but Gypsy survived and gained weight. The hole where the tube had been began to close. It became a symbol of something else, her mother's control and her escape from it. In July 2016, 1 year after Dee Dee's death, prosecutor Dan Patterson announced he would not seek the death penalty for Gypsy or Nick. He called the case extraordinary and unusual, and considered Gypsy's history of abuse and her physical condition at the time of arrest. As part of a plea deal, Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The court sentenced her to 10 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in December 2023. She would not face trial. Shortly after sentencing, Gypsy was transferred from Greene County to the Chillicothe Correctional Center. Compared to jail, it felt like a relief. The facility was clean, it wasn't overcrowded. She shared a dormitory with other women and had access to outdoor time. For the first time in her life, Gypsy felt free. Between 2016 and 2023, she used her time in prison to educate herself. She earned her GED and enrolled in several courses, including Impact of Crime on Victims and Pathways to Change. The ICVC course was mandatory, but for Gypsy it became personal. She began to see that her mother wasn't the only victim. Nick had lost his freedom too. She wrote a letter to Dee Dee during that course and poured her grief into it. She described it as a moment of peace that no holy water ever could provide. She was eventually trained to help facilitate the same courses. Therapy was not available to her, she didn't qualify, but she read extensively. Books helped her understand trauma, codependency, PTSD, and addiction. A course on codependency had a deep impact. It helped her realize how the relationship with her mother had shaped every part of her identity. Gypsy also experimented with her identity. She took jobs, made friends, lived in a group environment. She explored her sexuality and later said that trauma had caused a kind of mental block around intimacy. She relapsed once in 2018, taking Suboxone. The experience ended with her lying to Christy for drug money, but she forgave her. So Gypsy went cold turkey again. She said that moment of earning forgiveness taught her she was worthy of love. Her relationship with Rod and Christy deepened. They visited regularly, shared family stories, brought food. They helped her reconstruct the truth of her early life. DD had lied about nearly everything. It was painful, but grounding. In September 2021, Gypsy was unexpectedly taken to segregated confinement, the Hole. Officers told her she was under investigation for an escape plan. She denied the accusation. The entire experience was disorienting. No clock, no quiet, just the constant noise of yelling, banging, and chaos. She only found out later that the investigation had been triggered by a stranger's post on social media. Someone she didn't know had joked about busting her out. On December 9, 2021, Gypsy had her hearing and Christy spoke for her. Gypsy explained what she'd been through, her upbringing, her crime, and the programs she'd completed in prison. Deputy Warden Amy Parkhurst acknowledged her trauma and recommended therapy. The parole board didn't take long. By Monday, Gypsy had an answer. Her release was granted, and the date was set, December 28, 2023. The family tried to keep it quiet. They knew how rumors could spread, but eventually the news leaked. An acquaintance had told In Touch Weekly. Even so, the date held, and after nearly 8 years, Gypsy was going home. In May of 2017, the HBO documentary Mommy Dead and Dearest aired, bringing Gypsy Rose Blanchard into the public spotlight. Letters began arriving from across the country, messages of support, questions, condolences, some of them blurred together. But one stood out. The letter came from a man named Ken. His voice, Gypsy would later say, leapt off the page. She thought it was ironic. Her mother had always hated Barbie's Ken. That alone made her laugh. She decided to write him back. Their correspondence deepened and soon letters turned into phone calls. They learned they had things in common, family dynamics, a shared sense of humor. Ken came from a large family with many siblings. Gypsy had grown up alone. His stories of crowded dinners and loud holidays felt like glimpses of a life she'd never had. When Ken visited her in prison, she was swept off her feet. She found him handsome. 37 minutes into the visit, Ken leaned over and kissed her. A full, passionate kiss. It was a clear violation of prison rules, so Ken was immediately escorted out. Gypsy considered herself lucky not to be thrown into solitary confinement for it. She later said it was 100% worth it. His words, "I love you," felt like the strongest drug she'd ever known. After about a year of back and forth, Gypsy asked Ken over the phone, "Will you be my husband one day?" He replied, "Of course." During a visit in October the following year, Ken proposed formally. There was no ring, no kneeling, just a quiet moment in a prison visiting room. He took her hands and said, "Gypsy, I know you through and through, and I love you for who you are today, for the heart I've come to know. Will you marry me?" She said yes. Rings weren't allowed, so Gypsy found a way around it. She bought a silver band on the prison black market from an inmate who was getting a divorce. They kept the engagement mostly private, telling only close family. In 2019, the act premiered on Hulu. A fictionalized drama based on Gypsy's case, it turned her into a pseudo-celebrity overnight. Her personal life was suddenly public property. Strangers dissected her every move, and Ken struggled with it. He was a private person, so the constant attention took a toll. Not long after the show aired, Gypsy received a letter from Nick Godejohn. In it, he accused her of adultery, claiming he'd taken her virginity, and that by God's law meant they were already married. For Gypsy, the letter was an attempt to humiliate her, to control her. It reminded her of how he'd manipulated her during their online relationship. The contrast was jarring, Nick's dominance versus Ken's gentleness. For the first time, she saw her relationship with Nick for what it had really been. She wrote a letter back meant as closure. She told him plainly that she had moved on and that her testimony at his trial had not come from love, it had come from duty. Despite that strength, the end of her relationship with Ken hit hard. At first, Gypsy believed the growing media attention had driven him away, but later, Ken reached out with a different explanation. He said others, people he trusted, had told him it wasn't the right time to marry her. Some were therapists, some were family. The message he heard most often, if you love her, set her free. Ken told Gypsy he believed he was doing the right thing, that leaving was an act of love for her. Gypsy experienced the loss alone. Her first heartbreak came behind bars, with no friend to hug her, no one to take her out for coffee, no mother to talk to. She said, it was a moment that should have been shared between a mother and daughter, but never would be. She thought about turning to drugs, about hurting herself. Instead, she cut off all her hair and fell into depression. She cried to Christy. She turned to God. In time, another letter arrived, this one from Ryan Anderson. At first, Gypsy ignored it. Her heart was still hardened, but Ryan was persistent. His voice was deep, southern, and familiar. He was from Louisiana like her. It felt like home. They started talking about football. Ryan liked the Saints, Gypsy preferred the Chiefs. They joked, they prayed, they talked about the future. She opened up slowly. Ryan made her laugh. He shared his fears. She shared her past, the ugliest parts. There was no shame, just honesty. They spoke daily, multiple times a day, hours before bed. When Ryan once called her my heart, she froze. It was something Dee Dee used to say, but Ryan listened. He adjusted. Their arguments felt different. They didn't scare her. They made her feel closer. By the time her family found out, the relationship was already serious. Her father, Rod, and stepmother, Christy, were wary. They encouraged her to wait. They sensed that her heart still hadn't fully let go of Ken. But Gypsy was determined. She wanted a family, stability, a southern husband, a chance at normal. In October 2022, Gypsy and Ryan got married inside the Chillicothe Correctional Center. It was a quiet ceremony. No gown, no guests, just two people promising to build something together. 4 months later, the pressure set in. She began to question everything. Being someone's wife, living up to expectations, the responsibility, the fear of losing her identity. Ryan was a teacher. His demeanor was calm, authoritative, and at times it reminded her of her past, of Dee Dee, of Nick, and their control. She panicked. She considered an annulment and even wrote to friends, I am thinking about going forward with an annulment. She hoped they'd talk her out of it, but they didn't, so Ryan stayed. He scouted apartments, made plans for her release. They patched things up, the dreams came back. A future. There were still questions, still doubts, but for now they were together, and Gypsy had found something that had always been missing, a choice of her own. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. There's no denying Gypsy Rose was a victim. Years of abuse at the hands of her mother left her isolated, infantilized, and physically and psychologically stunted. She was confined to a wheelchair she didn't need, subjected to countless unnecessary medical procedures, deprived of formal education, and kept under near-constant surveillance. Her reality was carefully controlled, distorted, and shaped by a parent who presented herself as a selfless caretaker while inflicting unrelenting harm. But that reality ended in a murder. What happened in June 2015 was not an act of spontaneous desperation. It was a planned killing. Conversations with Nicholas Godejohn, saved in text messages, reveal not just intent, but details. Gypsy was not the one to wield the knife, but she opened the door, gave the weapon, and waited in the bathroom while her mother was stabbed to death in her sleep. And then they ran. Days passed before anyone discovered what had happened. Some argue that growing up in such a warped environment alters a person's sense of right and wrong so deeply that it can't be held to the same standard. That Gypsy's world, limited by lies, medical manipulation, and emotional control, left her incapable of seeing another way out. That she tried, in her own limited way, to survive. Others point out that she had access to help. Her father and stepmother, though not part of her daily life, had offered support. She had internet access. She was capable of reaching out, and eventually did, but only after the crime. Can someone be both a victim and complicit? Can murder be both understandable and unforgivable? The answers aren't easy. What's clear is that this case doesn't fit neatly into any single category. It's tragedy layered on tragedy. The justice system imposed punishment. Gypsy served her time. But the emotional reckoning, public, personal, and societal, continues. It's a case that forces questions about control, about culpability, about what happens when no one sees what's going on behind closed doors, and about what someone becomes when their whole life has been a lie. In early December 2023, Gypsy Rose Blanchard's life changed forever. On December 28th, prison gates opened. She stepped into the freezing pre-dawn air and was handed to her husband Ryan, waiting in the warmth of his car. No tearful greeting, no crowds. Just the clarity of freedom. The iPhone Ryan gave her felt moments deeper than an alien device, like proof she'd walked out of a cage and into a life she could finally start crafting for herself. Her release came 2 years before her original parole date, granted in December 2021. But it wasn't simple. Intense media scrutiny, a reality TV crew, reporters lurking, Chillicothe authorities braced for chaos. When Ryan received the call, 2:30 a.m., pick up in 45 minutes, they knew everything could go sideways at any moment. The following day, waking in a hotel, no welcome zoo, just distant flashing lights, her new status caught up. Though her parole permitted her to live in Louisiana, Missouri's jurisdiction still held her. Jackson County deputies declared her a security risk and demanded she leave Missouri by 3 p.m. that same day. Freedom was an illusion, she later reflected, panic rising as if she'd been caged once more. After negotiations, she gained until noon the following day, but only to begin her life barred from stepping outside, except to meet her parole officer. Still, her first New Year's Eve unfolded quietly and beautifully in Louisiana. Her father and stepmother flew in. They cooked, watched the Saints game, laughed, and danced. When her dad spun her across the kitchen floor to My Little Girl, Gypsy felt what normal felt like, a memory of her stolen childhood no longer beyond reach. But life, once free, resumed its unpredictability. On the 9th anniversary of her mother's death, June 10, 2024, Gypsy revealed the next chapter. She was expecting her first child in January 2025. She had filed for divorce from Ryan, and life has come full circle. Her first fiancé, Ken, has moved to New Orleans, and they're raising a child together. The same date that once marked grief, horror, shame, now marks rebirth. Gypsy sees it as something more than coincidence. She heard from her OBGYN that her sonogram was scheduled for Monday, June 10th. To her, it's no accident. She believes her mother is sending a message. It's time to move forward. For both of them, at last, to be free.